Energetika és fenntarthatóság. Panelbeszélgetés az E.ON
Energy and Sustainability panel discussion sponsored by E.ON Hungária. Participants Zsófia, Beck, Managing Director and Partner, Boston Consulting Group. András Biczók, MAVIR Utilities President and Chief Executive Officer. Zsolt, Jamniczky, E.ON Hungária Group Deputy CEO. Moderator is Andrea, Pánczél, White Paper Consulting Managing Director.
Jó napot kívánok mindenkinek!
Good morning to everyone. I think we can start our panel. So the title and the topic is Energy and Sustainability, and I'd like to start with good news. Just joining in on the end of the previous panel here, the gender ratio is 50-50, so that's great. Obviously our topic is a very burning issue, something that we've touched upon in the previous panel discussion as well, but before starting, I'd like to ask all our participants to briefly introduce themselves, and at the same time I'd like to ask them to briefly answer the following question. Obviously, sustainability has a lot of various branches and different companies focus in different areas, and these aspects are included in different ways into your strategies. What is your take on the sustainability of your companies?
Thank you and good morning. My name is Zsolt Jamniczky. I am Deputy CEO of E.ON Hungária.
I am in charge of the customers, so this means that all the areas and fields, starting from marketing to an electricity trade to customer solutions, including energy efficiency, e-mobility, any solution with which we can turn our customers more sustainable are in my portfolio. Another thought, the other important part of our activities is network operation. We operate networks in the Trans-Danubian region. So we have approximately 80,000 kilometers of electricity cables, and in Budapest, Elmű was also included to our network, and additionally, approximately 21,000 kilometer gas network is under our operation in the Trans-Danubian region. About sustainability, I'd like to touch upon a different aspect. Obviously, every company aims at sustainability. How can we halve our CO2 emissions? Everybody has plans to achieve that goal, but I'm very, very happy about the fact that Mr. Kapitány talked about energy transition, and I'm very glad to be working in a front of energy transition. So the future is electric. Electrification is present with a huge expansionality, and to make sure that we turn Europe more environmentally friendly, electricity is going to play an increasing role, and our company is active in that very field, and with all of our solutions we try to electrify solutions, and we try to turn the electrons themselves green. Today, this morning, I read in the news that only 10% of the energy production of the world comes from renewables, so 90% is still to be achieved. And if we talk about our goals for 2050, then we can see that we have a lot to do, and it's a good thing to work for these objectives. András,
yeah, good morning. My name is András Biczók. I'm here on behalf of MAVIR. MAVIR is the transmission network operator in Hungary. This includes 3 important activities. Obviously, it's difficult to compare our
our cable network. We only have 5,000 kilometers, and these 5,000 kilometers connect the large hubs. The other aspect is operating networks. So you may have seen pictures where system operators sit in front of huge screens and operate, even if there's a fallout of a few seconds that can cause significant problems in terms of balancing. And our third activity, which has become very important recently, is operating the market, which makes sure that we can operate a good cross-border market. So, the most important part that we have to highlight is that the electricity markets are very much in our focus. I think we are going to remain in a focus for a long time to come, not only because things are becoming electrified, but also because sustainability that we are talking about so often it consists of a lot of elements, and we have to establish a lot of elements, and synchronization is very, very important. So we have to make sure that there's synchronization between producers and users, and that we have IT, market operation, etc. And these have to be mature enough to make sure that the new future, a sustainable future, can operate in a similarly secure manner that we've gotten used to over the past 10 years. Obviously, at your company, Zsófia, you analyze and understand sustainability differently. Yes, good morning. I am Managing Director and Partner at Boston Consulting Group. We don't have a single kilometer of network or cables. We are a global advisory group. We are present in 50 countries around the world, and I work primarily in the energy industry, and I'm in charge of the advisory activities in Central and Eastern Europe. And recently I've also become responsible for climate and sustainability, which goes slightly beyond the energy industry. And yes, consulting groups, advisory groups have a slightly different approach, but I think there are two sides to this coin, a direct and an indirect one. So the indirect one is where we help establish climate strategies for countries, for governments, or cooperating with MOL, Shell, E.ON, network providing companies. So we help energy companies in decarbonization, and obviously Boston Consulting Group also has their own direct goals. One of the most important ones is the Net Zero 2030 goal, but another undertaking is to spend a certain amount of money by 2030 to support companies around the world in decarbonization. Our topic is obviously energy and sustainability, but we have to talk about greening, supply, security of supplies, various services. But let us perhaps start with the following. Obviously, the current situation with the war, with the high energy prices, to what extent do these factors help greening and decarbonization, and what are the limits or hindrances? Well, first of all, I would say that the high energy prices are not a result of the war, unfortunately, or not unfortunately, but we are leaving the cheap energy of the 2010s behind. And we are actually seeing the disadvantage of this period because there were no investments made. So this is a past process, and the war has only made this process faster. and stronger. But the silver lining is perhaps that we've talked about for a long time how to support green solutions, PV systems, buzzwords in Hungary. And there was a lot of money put into this greening effort. And then, one day from another, the business case stands by itself. And I think that's the good side, because we can green or turn things greener without support. We do not need to have preferential prices, etc. And I think that provides new momentum to turning our operations greener. Another issue is, of course, how this took place. There's a very bad example, Germany's example. After Fukushima, nuclear power plants were shut down. We will rely on renewables, and we see how this affects the system, and we also see the prices that turned out as a result of these impacts, of these efforts. So basically those who live in blocks of apartments had to pay these for apartments. So we see good and bad examples, but what is very important is that this price level provides another momentum, a new dimension to these efforts from the investors' side. I guess we will talk about the war in Ukraine. That obviously relates to the issue of security of supplies. Will we have gas or not? Will there be an embargo or not? Well, the bad news is that this is not how things work. This is not this is not the way things can be solved. We cannot just say, yeah, we don't want Russian gas, because that's not going to work. And obviously, having a nuclear power plant or even a gas power plant will not be established from one day to another. I talked about this with András. If they order a gas turbine, they will receive it in 5 years' time. There's huge demand for it, and there are problems in the supply chain as well. So the green transition will come, it will continue, but not at the same dynamics as we had thought, and not in the manner that we think about today. It's a very complex process, and I am sure that there will be compromises that will have to be made. And I really like the word mosaic. This is also a field where we have to work on mosaics, and we have to make sure that the pieces of this puzzle fit together on a European level as well. Zsófia, to what extent do you think this question is relevant? To what extent do you receive extra workload at your company? Yes, absolutely. I agree with Zsolt. Obviously, on the one hand side, there is a tendency towards decarbonization and becoming greener, but on the other side, there's also the cost aspect, the financing aspect, the financing structure aspect, and obviously the dependency on the Russian gas, which in this particular region is a very problematic issue. The V4 countries are between 76 to 84% in terms of dependency of Russian gas. So whatever can be done in Western Europe has to be complemented in a mosaic manner with hydrogen, with electrification, etc. But there's not one single solution of saying, for example, yes, the solution is hydrogen. We will need Russian gas. In this region, the only country that could replace Russian gas within a sensible time frame is Poland. Neither Slovakia nor Czech Republic nor Hungary could do this. I would like to definitely talk about security of supply in the coming minutes, but I'd like to ask our last panelist, how do you solve this issue? I think all the aspects that Zsolt and Zsófia mentioned are very important, but there's one more element that is very important, that's the time factor. So in the field of energy, generally we're talking about large investment volumes that require long period of implementation time. So there's a dynamic technological development. So the network development is a very complex issue, and IT development is a complex issue. And in our field, this takes 3-4 years. So there's a time, a lag in this regard. So we have to make sure that we really link the elements. And as long as sustainable energy sources or renewable energy sources are not able to be linked or cannot be linked into a system, we will have to have hybrid solutions. We will have to rely on the conventional systems, and we will have to integrate the new ones. Obviously, our systems will become more complex, they will become more volatile, more vulnerable. Systems will have to become much more faster. So I think this time factor is a very important aspect. We can work a lot, but this is not something we can influence. How flexible is the system now? I don't think the system can be flexible enough, and this shows that in a case of renewables, for example, dependence on the weather conditions is very important. Over the past 1.5 years, when we talked about this issue, we made a lot of graphs, diagrams, and statistics, and there's obviously just one graph that can describe the case for our company, and that shows the change in the amount of sunshine that we get, because we cannot store renewable energy for the time being. And Zsófia also mentioned this. We will have to have a diversified toolbox in the future that consists of several elements, but many of these solutions are still being developed. So even if they are available, even if we see these solutions, they are not yet finalized enough to be applied in an industrial manner. There's just one comment reflecting on what Mr. Kapitan has said. Let us learn from those who are ahead of us and doing things better than us. And I think this is something we've already touched upon. There are a lot of solutions that work in Australia, for example, or that work in North America. Examples, for example, some not necessarily technological solutions, but regulation, demand-side management, recharging agreements to customers. And obviously there are also technological solutions, a part of which are not yet fully established or are very costly for now. But this is very important. There are a lot of countries that are ahead of us. There are a lot of countries that have faced the same challenges, and we can learn from them. Yes, touching upon once again on the security of supply that you've already talked about, we are talking about 100 billion cubic meters of Russian gas in Europe, which is very difficult to replace, even if the US LNG amount is being doubled, which is still very minuscule part of this Russian gas. Obviously, gas is very important because gas power plants also create electricity and therefore play a very important part in our network. So what do you see the potential, what are the potential solutions? Well, in the short term, and as Zsófia said, especially in this region, there is no solution. So we can talk about a 5+ year timeline, but this is definitely not going to happen in 1 or 2 years. We definitely need Russian gas then. Yes, well, the pipes come from Russian. We are quite unlucky. We have no seaside. The Polish can be separated from the Russian gas because they have an LNG terminal at their seaport, and obviously the Norwegian gas is closer to them. Well, what we can rely on is the Croatian LNG terminal. Well, yes, that is there, but that's very, very little. And obviously also percentage-wise, LNG is a very, takes a very little share. So I think, if I remember correctly, 22 billion cubic meters of LNG arrived to Europe. If we double that, we will be around 40. And compared to 150 billion cubic meters, that's still very little. So this is the first aspect. The second one is the price of LNG. We're talking about a product which operates based on very brutal rules. It comes via boats and ships. And it operates. There's a strong competition. So if someone pays a higher price for it, they will divert the transport to, for example, Asia. It's very nice, as President Biden said, that they will give us LNG. This is a political slogan, but if we translate it to number of ships, to gas molecules, this is really just one drop in the ocean of gas. A different issue is that we will have to reduce gas consumption. So the greatest problem is our consumption. We use gas for heating. Hungary uses Russian, or formerly Soviet, gas. In the Netherlands, they have a similar share of gas being used for heating purposes. So I've talked about electrification. So at some point, gas will have to be reduced to some extent. But even small things count. For example, turning down the heating like 1 grade Celsius. And if it's not only me turning down the heating, but 1 million people, then this all adds up. And that will result in a better impact. But for now, I don't see a solution with which by next year we will be able to replace the amount of gas coming off from Russia. And if we're already talking about security of supplies, we are almost now in May, and we should already be filling up the storages, which is happening at a certain pace, but the problem is that usually in summer gas is cheaper when we don't really use gas. But now it's not cheaper. It might become cheaper in winter. So there's a disbalance once again. So the filling of the storage is not really working economically. E.ON would like to introduce mandatory storing, but this is something that is only being talked about for now. But who's going to pay for that is another issue. One extremity could be if all the storage units were classified, then we could say, okay, 20 forints per cubic meter is the price for storing. That could be then translated to further price levels. But these are the problems that we are facing. And when, for example, Western Europe did not fill its gas storages, that was last year, and that was a big problem. So there's something to be worried about, isn't it? Isn't there? I'm sure that there will be a decision, but obviously it's not in the interests of Russia to stop, because if they do, their storages will be filled by July, because these taps are not like water taps that you can just open and close the way you like. It usually takes some time to restart these flows, and I'm assuming that these are not 21st century solutions.
So, well, summer is close, so what happens if it's hot again? Then can we expect some kind of limitation in these circumstances? Let me come back to gas just for a minute. I think that this Russian-Ukraine conflict shows that gas and electricity are closely linked. If there's no gas, there's no electricity. So I think that when we are talking about gas, then everybody thinks about heating, and when we get out of the heating season, then everybody thinks that, well, there's no problem, and it's enough to start thinking about gas in October. It's not the case, because actually in generation of electricity, gas is something that we depend on, not only here, but in other parts of Europe as well. So the two sectors, so to say, breathe together. So I think it's not so much the heat in summer that's going to cause a problem, because even if we had some heat waves in past summers, we could endure it, and the balance can be maintained. But actually, what we can see that storms and some other weather events will become more severe. So I think that actually integration of this in our lives will give enough to do for everyone. Even the PV peak actually record was broken last year. So we have to balance these electricity consumption levels. Okay, then we keep our fingers crossed that in MAVIR you can do that. Well, Zsófia, how do you think that this gas problem can be tackled, and how gas could be supplied if it is not purchased from Russia? So actually, for instance, in Hungary, we don't have too much lignite and coal-fired power stations, unlike those in the Czech Republic, because they do have. So actually, nobody will stop operating their coal-fired power stations, because even if they emit CO2, they need to generate electricity. So actually, yes, sustainability, of course, is at question here. Yes, actually. So now the Czechs say that for until 2030, they will stop using coal-fired power stations, but not gradually. Instead, only on the 31st of December 2029, they will stop them. So it's not going to help us in decarbonization in the short run. And let me join to something that Zsolt mentioned, whether there's going to be some limitations. Well, I think that consumers will limit themselves self-naturally if prices go up. So actually, if we take energy at a regulated price, then under the current overhead limitation regime, where the energy prices are limited and there's a cap on that for consumers. So whether under these circumstances consumers are ready to reduce their consumption is a question. Well, we could talk more about that, but we are pressed for time, so just a short question and answer. So let us talk about the current situation with the Russia-Ukraine conflict. So István Kapitány has mentioned that there has been no similarly exciting period in the past 35 years. So this is an exciting period. So when there's a crisis, that gives us some excitement as well. So I want to close this panel discussion at a positive note. So therefore, I would like to ask you whether in the next challenges ahead of us, there's going to be anything positive that you could talk about even today. Well, I think let me come back to István Kapitány again when saying that if you know the right solution, then you are suspicious, and you always have to be trying to find the solution. So what we have ahead of us currently is that a path on which we have to tread in order to find a good solution, and we have to get rid of an axiom that is inherent in a big company, that you always step fast, like startups. And then if you fail, you should take a next step, what a startup does. So it's like it's not the right approach, but nevertheless, there's an extra dynamic in that, and maybe there's a lot of reserves in that. Well, let me add that energy will be in the minds of people, and then I'm sure that in Europe they will have to consider that if for nothing else, but for energy prices. So we have to be energy conscious in our consumptions. And the second thing is that I want to highlight in relation to the Russia-Ukraine conflict about some positive aspects is that the system used to be part of the system of Russia, and then they were actually operated in an isolated mode when the war started, and then now they have connected to the European network, and then it was only a matter of 2 weeks that we could do that. Otherwise, it would have been half a year. I don't mean to say that we had no sweat and tears through the process, but nevertheless, we've been very fast at connecting the system of Ukraine to the European system, and we have a lot of high voltage lines towards the Ukraine, so Hungary is quite exposed to that, and then we just connected quite a lot of the systems from the Ukraine to the Hungarian system, and then this is a cooperating system, so it's a whole network from Portuguese to Turkey. So, and when they ask that when something happens in Ukraine, how long does it take for it to reach Hungary? Then the answer is that within 2 seconds it will go as far as Portugal. So that's a whole system. Okay, so Zsófia, well, I think there are 2 things. So actually in energy, of course, we need to do greening, even if not in the long term. And then the other thing that is positive for me is that in Central Eastern Europe, now we are put on the map of the world with something positive, because we've been very fast at helping people from the Ukraine in sorting out their crisis, and also the refugees coming and victims coming from there, and we could help, and I think this is something we can be happy about. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I think that time is up, so that's it.